everyone. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 4 of Real Estate Wealth and Overall Health. We have a fantastic show and a guest speaker today. And before we, start, I just wanted to say we are on YouTube, so subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to that. And we're also on Spotify. You might be listening to us on there too. But again, I'm Adriano Fiacconi and
I'm Merilyn Nunno.
And today we have a great show. So what will we be talking about today, Merilyn?
So let's talk about we're right in the middle of our spring market. Let's talk about what we've been seeing, offer dates, where we think the market's going to go, and some of the changes lately that we've been seeing, because things are changing week by week. So
it's interesting. I mean, we've had a few sales and they've all been different. We sold a condo, and that was an interesting one. That sold over asking. We did an offer date with one offer. We've sold another one where we got 5 offers on the property, and then we sold it a few days later. And then we had one with, I think, 9 offers, and we sold that night. They were all offer dates, but we are seeing, properties where you can negotiate off of it too. So, how are you finding things?
Definitely. So I've been seeing that in the last 2 weeks, things have slightly shifted, where if I'm out with buyers, they have offer dates on the properties that we're looking at, and offer dates will come, and then you don't get any offers. And then the next morning I'm getting, my phone's ringing, and the agents are, asking me, Merilyn, let's negotiate. Is your client interested? We're motivated. So, and that did happen, in all fairness, to one of our listings as well last week. So we've noticed that within the last, I'd say about 2 weeks or so, that offer dates are not really going where sellers or agents maybe would like them to be. And I think the reason behind that, we touched on it a little bit last time that we met and did our episode, but it has to do with, the uncertainty with the tariffs. There's some economic uncertainty. The markets are, really volatile right now, as well as I think also elections are coming up on the 28th. Make sure to vote. And I think anytime around changes, there's always a little bit of hesitancy, and people just aren't, lined up with their checkbooks. But again, people are always buying and selling real estate for different life events. So there's always sales, as we're seeing, taking place. I think that that's probably the main reason. And also the weather here, we're in Toronto. 2 weeks ago, we had a big storm on a Thursday. It was bizarre. So I think that also, we're just kind of tired of this cold. And I think once the weather gets a little better, speaking of weather, I'm under the weather right now.
Her health is not working today, but we're going to get through it. I agree with you. What I'm seeing too is you might get an offer date and get one offer on it, and basically what I feel is that just brings out an interested buyer, and then you have to negotiate. Basically sometimes on the back end, what ends up happening is if a house is listed at $899 and the seller understands that they really want around $1 million. The buyer understands that, hey, look, that's not fair market value. And then what I feel right now is you need a really good buyer agent and a really good selling agent to make a deal, because there are agents out there saying, oh, the market, you can get $100,000 off any price, and that's not necessarily the case. There are times where a property, even in this market, is priced at fair market value, and a proper, a good buyer's agent should be able to tell them this is what the property is worth, and you're not overpaying for it, depending on the situation. And there's other times where there's room, or a lot of room, to negotiate because it's sitting. So I am seeing that, and but at the end of the day, if you're a first-time buyer, I always say this, I said this last time, if this was 2 years ago, people were dying for a market where you could go see a property 2 or 3 times, think about it, maybe bring your parents, bring a second opinion. We didn't have that 2 years ago, and now we have that, and then people are scared to buy now because now they're waiting for something else.
That, and also add-in conditions, right? So typically if it's a traditional, asking price, they'd want to put in a 5-day finance condition for the bank to go in and appraise it, make sure that everything's in order so that they can actually close on the property. They'd want to put in, sometimes a home inspection as well. So I think that there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Personally, I've been in both situations. I'd like to actually go in when it's a traditional price, because then I know, okay, the most I'd have to pay if they're asking $999, then I know, okay, the most I'm going to pay is $1 million, $999, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I think, one of the benefits with just the traditional way of listing a property.
One of the last things, and I always say this to people, is it is different. Like Brampton's market's going to be different than Burlington or the core in Toronto. Location does matter. We're dealing with a few of those things where there's different strategies. For Brampton or for areas like that particular, you probably aren't going to do an offer date. You're probably going to be more traditional, especially when you look at the inventory. That's a bigger thing too. So if you are looking to sell, look at what's available in your area, similar to yours. If there's a lot, you most likely you're going to be competing with those houses. If there's not much available, you may be able to have a different strategy and offer date, or at least price it a little more on the higher ends because there's not much competition. So it's very important to talk to someone that's knowledgeable about the selling process so they can explain that to you.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's time to introduce our special guest speaker.
Whoa. We're not yet. We're almost there. We're not.
Almost.
She's excited. Okay. You gotta go. You probably got something to do later. But no. But before we get into that, we want to talk about your thoughts on the Bank of Canada rate hold, because everyone saw that the rates came down 0.25% last time, and they probably should have been held. Now they're holding, and most people thought that was going to happen. But, they could go up. When we were talking to mortgage brokers at the beginning of the year, they're like, oh, the rates have got to come down because we have a lot of new mortgages from 5 years ago coming up for renewal. 60% of mortgages are coming up, and, the rates have to come low so that the renewal isn't that steep. We're starting to see now with what's going on in the States and stuff that the rates might hold. They could possibly even go up a little bit depending on how inflation is and how jobs are. So what are your thoughts on the Bank of Canada rate hold, and what might you tell buyers or sellers, for the next couple of months moving forward?
I think obviously it helps everybody who was in a variable mortgage, noticing on their statements that little bit that it comes down. It makes a difference for any family, even for someone like myself. When you notice that extra, let's say $200-300 a month difference, and it's lower in your payment, I mean, that money goes a long way for people. It's in a couple nights out, or depending on your lifestyle, maybe one night out, but that extra few $100s a month. Yeah, exactly. 2 drinks if you're going down to Yorkville or something, right? But I think that, it's almost like when you get that check in the mail, if anyone does get checks anymore. So it's always nice to have that rate drop or rate hold, obviously, if you're in a variable. But I also think that it is still fair if you look at historically how much rates were. Like, this is something I don't even know if I've ever shared with Adriano, but I'll share with everyone. When I bought my first property, and now we're going back over 20 years ago, I was in a 15%, I'm pretty sure it was 15% interest rate at the time. Wow. So I was, I was sweating literally as I was signing the documents. So I think that historically, when you look
3 years old when you bought that?
I guess I just kind of revealed my age there. But I think that rates are still, this is going to be the new norm, and that's what I'm telling our clients and some people when that comes up, because naturally that'll come up in real estate, is that anything in and around that 5-6% is going to be the new norm. And back in the day there were times where it was 16-18%, so not lately, obviously, many years ago, but we also want to make sure that things are still, money still has to flow in the economy, so we want to make sure that people are still comfortable with their payments. And when the rates just kept going up, personally, I feel like it was happening kind of fast, and it put a lot of financial pressure on a lot of people.
So do you think, my question was, if you're looking at the market and you're waiting for a rate drop in order to buy, now someone sees that the Bank of Canada holds because they're pausing because they don't know what's going on. Just as much as people in the United States and around the world, we don't really know what's going on. Everything's on pause. Is that a sign of fear? Is that a sign, that you shouldn't be looking to buy? What do you think?
I think it is a sign of fear, and that's what holds you back. But having said that, you don't want to get priced out either. So if you get, if you're looking for, again, one of the main reasons why you want to move and it makes sense to do so financially, I feel like there's always going to be a little hesitancy. I mean, I don't know about you, but me, moving is kind of stressful. I feel that for my clients as well. Like, so it's just one of those things where I think you have to just dive in, get your pre-approval, make sure that you're okay with the numbers, and just kind of
because there's you're never gonna pick the bottom of a market or the top. I mean, right now we're in a good position where you can negotiate, carry a lower balance. Rates might be a little bit higher, but you could pay it down quicker. But at the end of the day, people have to move. If you have to move for life circumstances, if you sit on your hands, if things could change really quickly, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, but wait, I want those prices, and things change quickly. So I would say if like you said, the numbers work, and you're not going to financially become house poor, it's a great time to make a move, especially if it's an upsize, because when the market picks up, you're going to be making more on a higher asset and higher worth asset, something worth more. So anyways, but I guess with that being said, now I think we can bring in. We have a special guest, so stay tuned, and we will introduce him shortly.
Today we have the pleasure of having Adriano Fiacconi here.
And Eros is, not only is he related to me as my father, but he was a planner with the city of Etobicoke and did a lot of work in Etobicoke, and the president of E.G.F Associates, which was a planning consultant. Yeah. So luckily we have him here today. We're going to ask him a few questions just about certain things in the city. We're not going to get into too much detail, but just his opinion on things and what he sees. And one of the, I guess, first things that I wanted to talk about, because we always talk about this, is lot splitting, especially in our area, Alderwood and Long Branch. A lot of people split 50-foot lots, and sometimes people always think they can split a lot. And so I want to have you in here because you've done a lot of work with people who do that. And maybe what are some of the things people should look at or keep in mind, because not all properties, even if they're close by, might be, even though they're 50 feet, they might not be able to split like something else. Is that correct?
Well, yes, that is correct. It depends, in the context in which you find yourself when you go to do a lot split. The easiest way is usually to get into a zoning part of the city where you see a lot of that type of development. You don't have consistency, for instance, in the lots as you do in, say, an established low-density residential area. If they're all homes that are 50, 60 feet, you're not going to come in there and be the first one to split it and into two lots, even of 30 or 40 feet, because you have to comply with all the other standards. Then there's also the whole notion of having to comply with the intention of the city's official plan. The city's official plan is the guiding document for all types of development. It's not just residential, it's all types of development. So you have to go in there and know. I mean, I've been involved with situations where an individual has retained me to do a lot split in an area, and things went very well for that. And then they go, well, here's another 50-foot lot we're thinking of buying. It's only a couple of streets away. And there you could see that the entire neighborhood has changed substantially from where they were when they got the lot split. And I would often give them my advice beforehand, before they even purchased the property or were considering purchasing the property, that the likelihood of success would not be very high. And that often helped quite a few people with doing that, unless, and as I would say, even in other forms of development, I would always say, look at the worst situation, worst outcome possible. If you could live with that, then go ahead and buy it. Because sometimes, it may be a good idea even to purchase the property, even though you can't split it, or you could try and split it and it doesn't work, you're still okay with the property the way it is.
Yeah. Right.
But that entire process, though, has to go through the committee of adjustment. Usually anything under 6 lots, if you're trying to split a lot, if you're trying to create a few lots on a larger parcel of land, you could do that, and you wouldn't be going through a plan of subdivision, which is something usually over more than 5 lots or something. You'll usually make an application for a plan of subdivision, which requires more more
Yeah, you just need more.
applications and things like that.
Yeah, but what we were kind of getting at was like, you know, a lot of times me and Marilyn will have clients and they're like, oh, I want a 50-footer to split. Like, look at that street, 2 streets over, they split it, right? I mean, I'm sure frontage depth, even though it's a 50-foot lot, I mean, I remember you were even saying sometimes that depending on, you know, the size of the houses on that street too, right? You've got to conform with the size of the houses, right? So what would, like, if you had to tell someone who's looking, you know, at a property that might be, you know, able to split, what would be maybe a couple things you would tell them to kind of look at in a neighborhood before they even go forward with that?
Well, as I said before, it's character. The official plan of the city usually wants whatever is being done in an area to be consistent with its policy. And usually that is to maintain the character. You don't want to come in and do any action, including the severance, splitting the lot, that would bring that particular lot out of character with the area. So that's the one thing, and that's a very important thing. You do not want to set the precedent. The precedent is always a concern of the neighbors. The other thing too is that, you know, you have to be sure that the lot, you may have a lot that has 50 foot of frontage, but it may not be as deep as the other one, because the depth and the area of the lot determine the size of a dwelling. In most cases, the city's bylaws limit the size of the house depending on the size of the lot. A floor space index, for instance, which is the difference, you know, the area of the house divided by the area of the lot. There are limitations that way. Usually what happens with a severance, or splitting a lot or whatever, is that it'll also be accompanied by a minor variance application, because it's unlikely that you would be able to meet all the standards of the bylaw when you split the lot. Suddenly, you may be in an area where there are other lot splits. That's the first thing that I would look at, is to see the types of homes in the immediate area, and I would say on both sides of the street, to get a feel for what that neighborhood is. If you've seen that there are some, and the good thing is too, that in some cases, there are older lots going back 20, 30 years that weren't split. They constitute part of that neighborhood. And you may be the first one to actually do a recent split into 2 25-footers. But if there are a number of ones, because of the history of the area, that there are smaller lots or whatever, you can go in and say, well, I'll be the first one to do a brand new one because it's consistent with that. The homes may not be consistent. That becomes another factor. You know, you have to try and be somewhat consistent. But if some of the homes were built, let's say, just after the war or something, they may be, you know, single-story bungalows or whatever. You're not going to build that in these days, certainly not in Toronto. Nothing can be justified for that. So, you know, you have to look at all sorts of things and how it potentially impacts your neighbors. That's a key thing. And it's often wise, and I would tell my clients, although some of them didn't want to in the earlier days, when it wasn't mandatory to have you speak, well, it still isn't mandatory to have you speak with your neighbors, but I always say that it's a good idea to speak with your neighbor before you intend to do that, just to see what some of their issues are or have been, even with terms of grading, with drainage, all sorts of issues with trees or whatever. All these things come into need to be factored into the consideration of severing the lot. So apart from that, you do need to comply with the bylaws, and knowing that you may need variances to the bylaw with respect to lot frontage, okay, with respect to the size of the house, with respect to its height, you have to respect what's kind of there in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And it does help to speak with your neighbors.
Because, I mean, if you go for a variance, then, you know, as soon as you do that, your neighbors can come out and oppose. If you meet everything, like I'm saying, not on a lot split, but if you were to add an addition onto a bungalow, let's say, as long as you conform with everything in the plan and you don't need variances, then the neighbors can't really say anything. But as soon as you want to build a little bit bigger or wider and you go for variances, then the neighbors can come and oppose, basically.
Yeah, they can, and then sometimes they do. I mean, you know, that's why I always say it's good to go in and speak to your neighbors beforehand. That way you'll know, even if they are opposed to what you're intending intending on doing, you at least know what their concerns are. And you can make certain modifications sometimes, even to your plans, to address some of those to a certain extent. It looks good when you go before the Committee of Adjustment that you have made attempts to do that, because the Committee of Adjustment not only seeks the opinions of the nearby residents, but it also gets input from the municipal departments. The planning department will make comments on it and all of these. Then the Committee of Adjustment takes all these matters into consideration, tries to identify, there are 4 tests basically that you have to go through. And once those tests, in their opinion, if they've been met, then they'll grant the consent, the severance.
All right. Well, that's a lot to kind of go through, but it hopefully gives you a good start if you are looking to maybe do something like a build or a lot severance if it's your first time. Certain things to think about. I guess another thing that we wanted to kind of touch base on is just basically like affordable housing and rental housing, even like basement apartments. I know we don't have to get into the legalities about it, but I know there are a lot of houses that myself and Merilyn sell that, you know, they got a kitchen in the basement, a separate entrance. We put that in there. We always put that it's not retrofit legal or retrofit status, meaning that it's not legal unless they have a permit. But I mean, those, you know, like I'd say, like there's a ton of houses that that have that, and I'm sure not a lot of them are legal. So how does the city look at that, or what are, you know, how can you get into trouble with something like that? Or what are the implications with that? Like, how does that work?
Well, okay. First off, very briefly. Okay, first off, technically, if you don't get a permit to do that, you are illegal. Okay.
Can you have a kitchen in the basement?
And I have a question too, because I get asked this quite a bit, and we have sold homes that had legal basement apartments, but I'd like to know, and I'm sure people listening would like to know, what are the requirements, like some of the main points that would make it, or that the city would look for in order to issue that permit to say, yes, it's passed, it's good, it's legal? Can you share that? Because I get asked that quite.
Yeah, I mean, there are a whole number of things, and I won't get into that because I didn't deal that much with the building department and the building codes, but it obviously has to meet codes and fire codes.
Okay.
That's critical, especially that. And then the bylaw itself, if you are looking to introduce or get a basement apartment, they have the standards for every zoning category in which you find yourself. So for instance, you need, one of the important factors that you have to have a separate access.
To exit.
And it doesn't, and it's not to be on the same side as the main entrance. So, you know, they're looking for the side. So
Two means of
Side or the
egress.
back.
two means of
Side or the back, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So you have your main residence with an entrance at the front. The other entrance for the basement apartment has to be on the side.
Yes.
Okay, there may be exemptions. And that's one of the reasons why, even though basement apartments are allowed in singles and semi-detached, they're also allowed in some cases with in townhouses. And obviously, given those, what I've just said, they would only be the townhouses at the ends.
Yes,
because you could then have an access. And you need to have the amount of space to access it, even for fire purposes. People knowing that there's another apartment or another unit separate from that one functioning, even within the same house. There needs to be good access. So these are some of the things that you have to look at. In terms of the inside, there's also a requirement now under the bylaw that basically says that the size of a basement, or let's say a secondary suite in in a dwelling, has to be less than 45% of the total gross floor area of the property. So it has to be less than that. The exception to that is if you are in a bungalow and you want to use the basement for a secondary suite, then it could be the entire basement, even if it happens to be 100%. So it's the same as the first floor. So you get away with that. Otherwise, it's 45%. They want it to be a subsidiary to the main property.
The other thing I wanted to ask was maybe parking. I know you say that too, because sometimes we get people that are like, oh, I have a basement apartment, I'm just going to stick another kitchen. I can make 2 or 3 units. Now, that might not even be legal right off the bat.
2 or 3 units.
Well, sometimes people split the basement up and they got, you know, and they're definitely not legal. But we see it, and then the hard part for us too is that they're like, yeah, you got to put 3 units. I'm like, we can't put this in there. Like, yeah, but look at how much. It's like, we cannot.
Load them up like cattle.
We can't do that. But how does parking become an issue with trying to get an approved dwelling? Like if you wanted a secondary suite, parking, I guess, becomes an issue, right?
Well, it does, especially in the more suburban parts of the city, as you could imagine. Downtown, I think, and I'm not going to speak because the variations throughout the city, I mean, they're pretty considerable in some places. Some places you simply can't get that, and you try and get on-street parking, for instance, when you don't have that. But for the most part, in more suburban areas like Etobicoke, for instance, or parts of Scarborough and that, you are required to have a separate parking space for the unit itself. And it cannot be a tandem parking space because there are limitations. You can't get out when a person can't get out. So that is a requirement under the bylaw. You could always seek an exemption to it through the Committee of Adjustment, through a variance if you have justification for it, and say, you know what, there's a parking area close by where they can park or whatever, and whatever the situation is, as long as you have a justification for seeking the variance, then you probably get it. It makes sense as long as it doesn't burden the rest of the community. But yeah, that's the whole thing with parking. But clearly, downtown where you have more public transit and things like that, they're more lenient. And in fact, I'm not sure some of the zoning categories may not even require you to have parking because the parking standards differ even between the closer, the downtown areas of the city and the suburbs in terms of what the requirements are for apartment buildings even. There's a lower requirement down there because of the infrastructure and subways, et cetera.
Yeah, and even parking, like sometimes there's street parking or
exactly. You get a permit through the city.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, and then we have one other topic we wanted to, and thanks for that. I mean, we can go on forever with these topics, but we got to, we have a time limit. But density and what Toronto wants. So I know, like, you were part of the city of Etobicoke, and I'm sure even back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when you were there, they had a goal of how they wanted the city to look. But myself and Merilyn, like in Long Branch, they're building 3 condos now close to the water, and you get a lot of people that are up in arms about that because, like, why are they putting these big towers here, and why are they doing that? And it does. The people that have been there forever, they're not happy about that. But on the flip side, you want people to be in areas that are easily accessible, close to transportation and stuff like that. So what are your thoughts on what the city is trying to do and
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, that's fine. And I actually took a glance at the city's official plan in anticipation of this because it has changed considerably over the last even decade or more. I mean, there is a push to increase the supply of both affordable housing, but even housing in general. You want to get housing, and you want to maximize because anything that you build is going to last 50 years. So you don't want to underutilize things because they're going to be there for 50 years or whatever. So when you have something come up, the whole intention of building up a city like Toronto is that you got to have a whole range of things available for anything. But high-rise apartments or even mid-rises, for instance, are a whole different things. They usually tend to be on major avenues or whatever that are outside the city center. You'll along the Queensway or maybe along Bloor Street and that, and their height is determined by the width of the road. They try and get a 45 degree angle. Okay, but now I'm getting off topic there in terms of that. But the general intent of the city of Toronto is to accommodate more population and with units that are more affordable. So, and it also wants to maximize on all the infrastructure and the expense that they've gone through and putting in, streetcars and subways and expansion of subway systems. They want to maximize. So where do they do that best? You do that best on these major thoroughfares where all this public transportation is accessible. The other thing you have to look for as well is the amount of parks and open space for these people. They have to benefit from that proximity to shopping and that. So a lot of these things all come into factors. And usually, very, very rarely will you have major developments, as you were suggesting, that are internal. I don't even think you could get it into a lower density residential area. There are policies against that. Now, if something already exists, the city will encourage even an increase in the density. Let's say 4-6 unit building or whatever. Somebody says, I want to build more, and it's possible given the designs or whatever, and its impact on the surrounding neighborhood isn't significant, they would go for that because they're trying to increase the the rental population or the rental provision of housing, as well as overall housing. Toronto is a growing area. And like I said before, the problem with a lot of these strips along the major avenues is that the units, even though they may be attached, are separately owned too. Sometimes you have to get people together so that you can actually build a mid-rise or even a high-rise, you know. And then the other thing, a lot of the policies that have come in, is that there is a requirement now that if you demolish, you know, rental housing or whatever, you have to make provisions either to accommodate the people that you are relocating, and then even in some instances, providing the opportunity for them to get back without rents increasing above the standard annual rate that you would normally get. There are a whole number of provisions there to accommodate the people that are displaced, as well as to create new affordable housing. And there's now a whole list of what constitutes affordable housing and affordable rents and purchases. But anyway, that's the thrust of it.
Yeah. Well, that becomes like a whole other conversation, because, you know, displacing people, and then when they come back, you know, after a few years, by the time it's built, they might not even be there. You know, they find their own, you know, another place to live, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's interesting, because we do notice that there are a lot of people in our area who've been there forever, and they're, you know, not happy with a lot of the buildings, like the larger buildings that are coming in. There's going to be more traffic and more cars, but at the same breath, it's like, you know, younger people or newer people want to live in that area, and it brings in better stores, it brings in better shopping and infrastructure. And we're kind of in an area, especially like Long Branch and Alderwood, where you have the GO access, you have highway access. So
water's right there.
The water's there, you have Mary Parks.
All the benefits and amenities are there. They're already established, and, you know, this is just a way of getting them, you know, for better use, you know. But I could understand people. I've dealt so many times with individuals where something new has happened. Some of these neighborhoods, not very much has taken place over the many years, right? Even on the strips, you know, you still have your local 2 stories, you know, with the retail on the ground floor, and you have an apartment above. That was the thing that everybody got used to. But, you know, the one thing, and they often don't do these studies, I've often wondered, going back afterwards, after the building has been built or whatever, and see that some of the things that they thought were going to be problematic aren't. But there are other issues. People are always reluctant. It's the NIMBYism. You know, I agree with everything, but not in my backyard.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes, even though the policies, I'll just add this one other thing and go on, but even though the policies of the city, the official plan and stuff like that, does make provision, a lot of provision for minimizing the impacts on any existing residential areas through the construction of new developments, even high rises or mid rises. So they do try that, but people are going to be that way, and they want to have their opinions heard and their concerns at least addressed. And sometimes you do get that by having the public meetings. There will be modifications made to the plans as a result of the comments made. So it is good to do that and good to be involved.
Yeah, and on that note, it's like the signs I see for someone with a 25-foot lot, with the sign in there saying, "Please stop lot splitting," and their house is the same size. So
their house, they were a lot split.
Yeah,
that's right.
Anyways, well, we appreciate your time coming in today. There's a lot, and you know, if we get questions, or if we want to dive into some of these questions a little more, we'll definitely have you back on. But thank you for coming today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. So it was really good. Thank you. And I also learned a lot from listening to you people at the beginning of it. So it's very good on real estate.
We have another subscriber.
You do.
Final thoughts. So predictions for the end of our spring market.
So the next couple months, I mean, it's interesting and it's tough. I feel like houses will sell. I always say this: if you're priced properly, and you have to go by comparables that have come in the last few months, you can't be looking at 2022, 2023 prices. Those aren't around anymore. You're gonna have to wait a bit. And I feel like you're gonna have a steady flow of business. It's not going to be, you know, as crazy as most spring markets are. I feel like people are a little bit hesitant. But I feel the people that need to move or want to move are going to move, and there is inventory out there, and the stats show that things are still selling. So I do feel that it's going to be, you know, reasonably well. I don't think it's going to be like a top you know, spring market like the best ever. I feel it's going to be consistent, and I think that's not a bad thing. People are going to be able to take their time and still purchase things, but buyers will feel a little bit better about being able to negotiate and getting conditions put in. And I think sellers will have to just wait a little longer. Sometimes they might be on the market 30 days, 60 days, but that's not an issue. That was common 4, 5, 6, 8 years ago. So we're back to that type of market, and I feel like things that people need to sell will sell. Where I do see an issue, and we've come across this, is the new construction pre-con. Those coming up, that's difficult. We've seen a lot of people who are struggling to close because the values are down, rates are higher, so the qualification isn't there. There's a little bit of there's some pressures there for people to close. But other than that, most people who have been in a property for a while, I think, are okay. And if you want to move, you can move. You just have to make sure your expectations are in today's market, not something a year or two ago.
Exactly.
Yeah. So before, we always end with a little bit of health and a little bit of wealth and stuff. This week, I guess, how's your health? It's been a little bit under the weather.
Yes, something's going around. So something kind of, as you can hear in my voice, kind of really knocked me out for a couple of days. And I'm a doer, so that's like, for me to stay home, even my clients are like, oh, wow, Merilyn, I've never heard you relaxing and taking some time off. So what am I doing in terms of my health? I've been going to get fresh juices, ginger shots, basically, hot fluids, some rest, and just trying to, some self-care and trying to take care of myself and speed up this recovery. And
that's
just
awesome.
Want to be at my best and be able to be my best for not only myself but for my clients as well. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure the weather, like we're going from 2 degrees to 18 degrees to -5, like it's all over the place. So it's one of those things where it will be you'll get through that.
Yeah, we're coming into a long weekend. It's going to be Easter, so for those who celebrate, happy Easter. And I also just wanted to add that Adriano and I finished our 6th but 3rd annual Easter food drive, and we actually noticed an increase in the amount of donations. So I was really happy to see that. It was really heartwarming to see that a lot of the community came together and really were very generous with their donations. So
that was great. Yeah, it was fantastic. And I guess on the real estate side, just quickly, we've been moving along pretty well. We have a lot of our listings are selling. We have buyers. Our team is doing great. So on that end, it's business as usual. It's probably a little bit better, I would say, than even maybe the start of last year or the spring of last year, I feel. Yeah. And we got listings coming up, so we're doing fantastic.
So once again, for all those that celebrate, happy Easter and have a great long weekend. This concludes this episode, and
remember to take care of your real estate, your wealth, and your overall health.